So if you're watching a movie from the 30s, things were different in the 30s. So even if you actually went back in time in the 30s, things would be different. So the cars are different, the clothes are different, gestures are different, slang is different. All those things are barriers between you and it often. But if a story is well told, everything in it is human.
Hello, and welcome to You Are A Storyteller. In this episode, Brian and Jesse discuss the importance of consuming quality content as a storyteller. Because in order to create something meaningful today, you have to have studied the work of yesterday's masters. We invite you to expand your palate and embark on the 30-day story challenge, where you'll watch hand-picked movies to help you hone your craft.
Brian McDonald.
Jesse Bryan.
Let's do a show.
All right.
I'm going to open up with a quote from a French writer from the 1700s, whose name I can't pronounce. So if you want to Google the quote, you can figure out how to say it. I couldn't figure it out. The quote is, "Tell me what you eat, and I will tell you what you are." And so on this week's episode, we're going to talk about the importance of your diet when it comes to media. Okay. You ever been on a diet, Brian?
Yeah. Yes. I have. I had to think about it for a second, but I was vegetarian for a lot of years, so that's kind of a diet.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then I was gonna hurt someone if I didn't have a piece of meat. It happens to people sometimes, but it was like 7 years, and then it was like I have to kill a cow with my bare hands. So
7 years, no kidding.
Yeah. So 7 years I did.
What was it like for you the first month of being a vegetarian?
It wasn't too bad. I actually wish I could go back to it, but maybe I can now. I don't know. It wasn't too bad. You know what? It's more of the social thing is a bigger problem, actually.
Really?
Come on, we're having burgers. What? You're not gonna do what? Yeah. That was a bigger thing.
You know what's interesting about that is it's the same exact way with the diet we're talking about, wanting people to go on. The hardest part of, like, if you're spending your nights and weekends watching a bunch of old movies and TV shows, when all your friends are saying, "Hey, have you seen that new blah, blah, blah?"
It's true.
It's just like any diet, right? Like I've gone on diets before where I've cut out sugar for a month, right? And the first few days are awful because you're having headaches. It's like not having caffeine or something, right?
That's when I stopped. I stopped coffee, yeah, that's happened when I stopped. But now I'm back on.
Right?
Monkey's back on my back. Yeah.
But then there was a thing that happened after a couple weeks of that where I started going I feel better, right? By not eating sugar. I got through that kind of dip, and I started feeling better. And then all of a sudden, after about a month, I was like, I'm okay. I don't really want any of that stuff. Now, of course, there would be a situation where I ended up going back, and then it started, right? But there's that period of difficulty you have to go through on any diet before you start to feel better and you start to see the results. And so what we're going to talk about today is really how do you assess, it's kind of like show me what you eat and I'll tell you what you are type of a thing, right? The shorter version of that is just you are what you eat. When we try to get people to consume and change their media habits of you should watch this and you should check out this. Have you seen Columbo? Have you seen Mary Tyler Moore? Have you seen this? People go, I tried to watch one episode and, it didn't really grab me, or I didn't really watch it, or I was on my phone while I was watching it and whatever. And I'm sure that's the same. And then we get frustrated. We're like, you got to give it a chance. You got to stick with it. Because once you stick with it, you'll feel better. Right. But if you don't ever make through that dip, you're not going to understand the benefits on the other side.
Yeah. It's,
right.
Yeah. I ran into this problem a lot. I was just talking about this. I ran into this problem a lot when I was working with an animation program at the University of Washington. And I was, the students would all, every year, I did it for 13 years or something. But every year the students would come in and all the artists would all draw a particular way. And it got more and more anime. Everything was anime. All their influences were anime. That's all they looked at, manga and anime. So it's you could look at other things, right? Because you're all drawing the same way. You could look there. There are artists all over the world and all throughout time you could be looking at, and that would influence your work in a different way. and you might have they weren't opening themselves up to all the possibilities of what they could be doing. They just had this one thing, and that was the style, and that's what everybody was doing. And it was just this homogenous thing. I don't understand. I think I've said it before on this podcast, but I like what Billie Holiday said, which is, if I sing like everybody else, why do I even need to sing at all? Right. And I think that what happens when everybody has the same influences and nobody's branching out, nobody's looking at other things. If you're going to create things and you all are pulling from the same resources, there's going to be a homogenous quality to all the work. And why are you there? Right. And also, I think that people get locked in their time and are influenced by things in their time. And what I think that does often is sometimes things were done better before, but you'll never know that. Again, I've said it before, but if you're an architect, you study the Colosseum in Rome. You study great architecture throughout time, not just what are people doing right now today, but you talk to film people or TV people or comic book people can be a little bit better, but not really, but sometimes they can be, but they are very locked into their time. And so they're not looking at sometimes the best version of the thing that they're trying to do.
We've talked before about how every time you study, for instance, you talk about the Colosseum, right? Like, I've been to the Colosseum a couple times. It's insane, right? Like, and it's hard to not stand there and go, how did they do this? And I promise you that if you studied that, it would teach you something about story, right? I remember you told a story about a friend of yours whose dad was like a master craftsman builder, right? And didn't he want to be an editor or something like that? Yeah. My friend Eric. Yeah. So Eric was, when we were teenagers and we both wanted to do film, I was working at a place doing sort of motion graphic stuff, and he started doing apprenticed editing work. But he was also working for his dad, who was a builder, and he didn't have enough time to do both these things. And so, and he was getting interested in the building stuff too, and really became a master carpenter. But at the time, he wasn't sure how to reconcile this. And the editor he was apprenticing under, this guy named Rich Jetner, and Rich said to him, because my friend said, I don't know what to do. I don't have enough time, to do the editing and the carpentry thing. And he says, I tell you what you do is you read about carpentry and you think about editing. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. It totally makes sense. Like when it comes to studying craft, it really comes down to study any craft and you're going to be able to see how they correlate, right?
Yep.
Because the principles are almost always the same. When it comes to a diet of what you consume, because you and I we kind of started this conversation because we were talking about something, and you were like, hey, did you see this thing that had come out? And I was like, no, man, all I'm doing is watching, like every night I'm watching another Columbo, and I'm like, I don't even know what's going on. I'm just keep going back further and further and further. And I've hit that point in the diet where I was like, I don't really feel like sugar. Like, no, I'm sure it's great, but I don't.
Right.
I'm kind of doing this other thing right now, We were talking about Treasure Sierra Madre or something, and then all of a sudden it's like, start going down this rabbit hole on this director or this writer or whatever, and you just keep following these threads back further and further and further, and you find more and more gold. But there's this dip that happens that you're going to have to be conscious of, right? Like maybe you're listening to somebody and the language feels old-timey or something. And so whenever you're trying to make, just like any diet, right, when you're trying to make that transition and there's that dip of like not having coffee or whatever and you feel a little off, like how do you get through that dip so you can start to see the benefits on the other side of really consuming different types of media, right? Maybe older media.
Right. I hear that's difficult, right? So I don't have, I feel lucky to have been born when I was born and grew up when I grew up, because things were just different. Some people had a black and white TV. Some people had a color TV. some movies that came on television. That's the only way you really saw movies, unless you went to the movies. You stream them. You couldn't, so some were black and white, some were color. And it seemed to make no difference. Like, no one thought about it as a big deal. I mean, yeah, color was kind of a big deal, but it wasn't the biggest deal. It wasn't
it took a while for it to catch on.
It did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was expensive, right, to get a color
sure.
television. It's like, well, I don't want to spend the money on a color television, and I've been watching Bonanza in black and white this whole time, so whatever it is.
Yeah.
So this thing, when I say to someone, "Hey, you should watch this movie," and they'll say, "Ooh, it's in black and white," I'm like, I don't understand what you're saying. I think they think they're not used to it, so I think it's boring. They feel like pieces of it. They're not getting all of the information or something. What's interesting is that the more you delve into black and white and the more you learn about black and white, the more you can see the beauty in black and white. It's a very expressive thing. It can be more dynamic in a lot of ways than color because of its graphic nature. Black and white photography can be gorgeous. Like if you watch the movie How Green Was My Valley, the black and white photography in that movie is gorgeous. Once you learn how to see and appreciate it, it's as if something lifts, like a fog lifts, and you're like, why did I not see this? How can I not see this? And the interesting thing about black and white, the transition, I don't want to just talk about black and white, but the transition from black and white to color was an interesting one in film because directors at the time when that switch was happening didn't really care for color, most of them. They were not interested in it. They thought the film lost something with color, the same way that silent filmmakers thought something got lost when sound came in. That doesn't make sense to people on this end of history, but if you listen to what they were saying, then it makes perfect sense.
So nobody really knows this yet because they haven't gotten to see it yet, but the interviews for this new kind of version of the show where you're interviewing all these kind of masters of the craft that's going to start coming out really starting on the next episode, you've gotten to talk to some people, and I know we probably can't announce everybody yet, but just dynamite, unbelievable people. And I was listening to the one that you did with Carl, and Carl wrote Jaws and The Jerk and stuff like that. Like, I'm talking like the people that are going to be on this thing are just amazing. And it was interesting because the two of you were talking, all of your references, I don't think the vast majority of the folks that are listening to that, when they hear that interview, are going to know what you guys are talking about.
I think that's probably
true. And that's where
true.
I was going like, wow, if you want to have the range where you can write Jaws and The Jerk,
yeah,
right, you need to have similar references, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting
like,
because
you better know what he's talking about.
Carl Gottlieb is older than me, and I think he was surprised that I knew the stuff I knew. I think, like, wait, you know this? Yeah,
he was talking about like how he's a writer on the Smothers Brothers, and you listed off all the other writers on the Smothers Brothers, right? And you could say he's like, oh, okay, okay, gotcha. We're on the same page, like. But the interesting thing, it's not just Carl. There's so many of these folks you're talking to that when you talk to them about influences, everybody's going way back, right? The people at the top of their game are not saying, oh man, I watched this movie on Netflix last night. Nobody says that.
Right, yeah.
Nobody said that. And I don't know how many you've been doing because, again, people haven't seen them yet, but I mean, you've probably done 10, 12 of these,
something
right?
like that,
and it's really interesting to watch because just from a you are what you eat perspective, the stuff that they're consuming, even now, and some of them, a lot of them are older folks and very accomplished, they're still going back, right? They're not clamoring for the latest Transformers release or something like you can tell that there's a different. It's like I remember when I was a kid. I grew up mostly on an army base, right? And it was a lot of macaroni and cheese and hot dogs and stuff like that. I remember the first time I went to a fancy restaurant being like, I don't know what this is. I don't even like the taste of it, right? I look back now and I was like, man, that was brie. What's wrong with you? Like but if you're not used to like all of a sudden this like expanded flavor palette and stuff, it might take a little while to go like I'm gonna just stick with my mac and cheese, you know. And it's like I promise, there's more out there. Like there's more out there. And that will teach you more, and you'll move so much faster. if you put the time in and actually, go back, right?
It's like digging for gold, right? Yeah, you have to dig, and it's just dirt. That's what you're going to feel like. There's just dirt in here, right? And then eventually you'll hit gold. Eventually something clicks, and I didn't know this was down here. This is amazing. This is bright and shiny.
Yeah.
It changes. Something changes in your brain, but you have to get past all of the barriers between you and it. So if you're watching a movie from the 30s, things were different in the 30s. So even if you actually went back in time in the 30s, things would be different. So the cars are different, the clothes are different, gestures are different, slang is different. All these things are different. They don't have cell phones. Oh, they don't have this. Oh, they don't have that. Oh, they don't have television. Whatever it is, all those things are barriers between you and it often, right? Like I can't identify with any of this. But if a story is well told, everything in it is human, right? And so it doesn't matter.
Still people.
They're still people. And they're still going to have people issues and people concerns, and they're going to behave and have the motivations of human beings that human beings have always had. There may be a different system of government. There may be whatever you're watching. All those things may be different, but what matters is always the same. And once you can get past the facade, what's on the front, what's on the outside of the story, once you can get into the story, it's amazing what happens. And it changes you enough when you do it enough that it's very hard to come out of it and watch new stuff.
Oh, yeah.
That is less well done.
Yes.
It's
right.
Yeah, you almost can't stomach it.
Yeah. Well, it's been really interesting because, I don't know if we've ever talked before this on the show, but like my wife, Katie, she likes, Real Housewives and all that kind of stuff, and I just cannot handle it, right? And really, for the last month and a half or so, every night we just watch a Columbo, and it was funny because a couple of nights ago she was like, "It's actually really hard for me to like go back after watching these." Yeah. You know what I mean? I was like, "That's cool." Like, oh, that's awesome. You're starting to realize like the stuff I was watching is not great. And once you get used to it, and it took a little while, you know what I mean? Once you get used to it, you're like, these are dynamite. So I was home yesterday, and I was like, what do you want to watch, tonight? She's like, I already finished that. I was like, wait, she's skipping ahead now. And I'm like, oh, so it went from like, hey, watch this with me to, I was like, hold on a second. Like, what's going on? But what kind of prompted this conversation too is a couple of days, I think even yesterday, you were talking about, I think was it David Blaine and what he did when he wanted to get better?
Yeah. Well, when he got his first television special.
Can you talk about what he did?
Yeah. So when David Blaine, the magician, who stopped doing magic for some reason and started doing stunts, nobody likes it but him. But he's an interesting magician. Magicians will say he's not the best magician, but that's for them to work out. Here's what's great about him. So from what I understand, before he was a famous guy, what he used to do was he used to go into the hip clubs in New York and like dazzle people with a couple of illusions and then leave. And then like it became this thing like, who's that guy? It's that guy, and he got enough notoriety and enough sort of fame through that he got offered a TV special. A lot of magic, a lot of people don't like magic on television. The thing about magic on television is you don't know if there's tricks happening. You don't know what's going on, and usually it's a picture of the stage or whatever. And it's like, now it's a lady, now it's a tiger, and it has a kind of artificial quality to it. Anyway, so what David Blaine did is he went to the Museum of Broadcasting in New York. I'm not sure where it is in New York. I've never been to it. I'd like to go to it. Anyway, he went to the Museum of Broadcasting and watched all the magic he could that had been on television. And television's been around a while now, so you could watch a lot of magic on TV. And he did that to figure out what other people had done. And he made a change. Because he was able to look at all of this stuff, the change he was able to make was instead of having the camera on the magician and having the magician be the show, David Blaine turned it around on the audience, and it was the reaction of people that made those shows work. So if you watch one of those, it's everybody going, oh my God. And what's interesting too is that he traveled to all these different places. So he goes to foreign countries and he goes to all these different places. And what I think is great about it is that human beings respond the same no matter where they are.
Yeah.
And that it's a way of saying that we're all the same. And I think that was actually, if he had an armature, that's what it was. That's what his stuff is built around. So, yeah, but it was the research that made him able to do that.
He went and he did that. He watched all the old black and white specials on ABC or whatever. Like, he went and he saw it all. And that's where the breakthrough came from, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I want to preface this by saying, too, like, when we talk about this step as far as, like, changing your diet, this is the difference between doing it because you truly love it and want to master it, or getting good enough at the lingo to get by.
Yeah.
There's a lot of folks that you and I work with and have worked with in the past where they'll be really excited about story, right? And I know you and I both know exactly who we're talking about, the folks we're talking about. And they'll learn enough of the lingo and spend, a few months getting into it. But this is the one thing none of them do. None of them will go back and actually watch the references. None of them will do the research. So they get good enough to be the best story guy at their organization or to be the best story guy in their friend group and have all the lingo, but they'll never understand it because they don't love it enough to actually do what David Blaine did. You said Chris Rock did something similar, right?
Right. Chris Rock used to go, he maybe still does, I don't know, go to the Museum of Broadcasting and look at stand-ups and look at all the stand-ups and what they did and what they were doing and learned a lot about, particular stand-ups. It's like, oh, this guy is always vulnerable and that seems to work. Maybe I need to do more of that. And, just seeing what worked throughout history. When David Letterman got his show, his first late night show, he had a morning show nobody remembers but me and him. So, like I pretended to be sick and didn't go to school, so I watched David Letterman's morning show. So I remember that show. But when he got his late night show, he went to the Museum of Broadcasting and looked at all of the old late night shows.
That's crazy. Him too, huh?
Yeah. So he looked at the Steve Allen show. Steve Allen more or less invented the late night format that we think of. Like Steve Allen invented, from what I understand, invented the playover, which is when the host comes out, gives the monologue, and then says, and say hello to the band, that thing. That was Steve Allen because, as I understand it anyway, that was Steve Allen because he thought, well, I'll finish my monologue, and then I've got to walk to my desk, and people have to look at my back, right? So that playover is a way to cover so that the host can go to their desk and then start talking. Yeah, that's right. So, and it's also nice to know what it's for instead of just copying the format.
Yeah, right.
Understanding why it exists. Because if you wanted to change it, let's say you didn't want to do that, you'd still have the same problem. Well, they're going to be looking at my back. What else can we do? Right?
Yep.
So understanding why it's there will help you come up with solutions. But anyway, he looked at Jack Parr, who was a Tonight Show host early on. He might have been the second one after Steve Allen. I think Steve Allen started the Tonight Show, and then it was Jack Parr. And then I think Johnny Carson replaced Jack Parr. But he looked at all that stuff and figured out what they did. And there's stuff on the early Letterman show that is almost exactly stuff that Steve Allen had done in the 50s.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, that's the difference, right? Between being good enough to be a stand-up and being good enough to host the Tonight Show. Or, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, it's the difference is, are you willing to take that step, right?
Yeah.
Because that will make, it's the same thing. I'm sure it's the same thing with like a personal trainer or something where they're like, hey, you got to eat better. And you're like, yeah, okay. And you're like, well, what does that mean? It's like fresh fruits, this and that. Oh, well, that's going to take a lot of time. And, and I got to go to the grocery store more than once a month. And they're like, yeah, do you want to live longer? And well, yeah, I just don't want to go through all the work of like chopping vegetables and washing fish. It's like, it's probably the same frustration they're having. It's like, well, then you don't actually want to do it.
Right.
Right. It's like, well, if you've got 3 of the greats right there and what they do, they'll do the same thing. Why I got to see it all? Like, it was funny. The other night I was watching Columbo, and you'll know this reference, but there's one where he goes, there's like this cannon explodes at a military school, and there's this guy, he's a jerk, and it was funny because they're trying to cement this character and what a jerk he is, and he does this thing where he wakes up all the kids at night and he's looking for a bottle of cider, like one of the kids cider, and I was like, that's mutiny. It's like, that's the Cane Mutiny.
That's the Cane Mutiny.
I was like, oh, that's the strawberries from the Cane Mutiny. I bet you the writers had seen the Cane Mutiny. Right? Of
course they did. Of course they
did. The strawberry scene, and go, oh, we could take that and use it in a little different way. And I was sitting there going like, damn, like when you can start to, and I'm sure that on the Cane Mutiny, they were like, oh, you never read the book where it's like when you can trace all those things back. But I'm sitting there going like, I sent you a video too of the producer who did Columbo, and he was like, yeah, we had to do 5 1.5 hour long specials in 4 months or something crazy like that.
Yeah.
Something crazy like that. And I was like, wow, number one, those specials are insane. But the fact they were kicking it out that fast, the only way they could move that fast is they had enough references in their head to go, I have to solve this problem. Right? Just like the other, here's the problem. They're looking at my back. Okay, I need to solve a problem. I need to cement this guy's a real jerk. Right? And then he's losing it. Oh, remember that movie? Remember they did the strawberry thing?
Yeah.
And Mutiny on the Cane? What if we could, it's like when you have that stuff in your head, you can keep up with a timeline like that. You can keep up with, that's what it means to be a professional, right? It's like, you can hit your deadlines, right? You can solve problems quickly, you know? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And you can also, because the problems have all been solved before.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
That's a great way of looking at it.
And if you know how they've been solved, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. Right? So maybe you have 5 references where you go, well, wait, this story they did it like this. This story they did it like this. This story they did. You know what we could do is a combination or whatever. Like, you know, if you look at Indiana Jones, I can't say Raiders of the Lost Ark anymore because George Lucas changed the name of it, so people don't know it's called Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's what? They don't know what I'm talking. Yeah, because he changed the name to Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark after the other movies started coming out. But anyway, but people my age say Raiders of the Lost Ark. But other people go, what? What are you saying? What are you talking about? But anyway, in Raiders of the Lost Ark, if you look at that, the first movie that Spielberg ever saw in the theater was why can't I think of the movie? The circus movie. No, I can't think of it. Cecil B. DeMille's circus movie.
Yeah. Greatest Show on Earth.
Greatest Show on Earth. Thank you. Greatest Show on Earth.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Charlton Heston is the lead in that. Charlton Heston's costume is exactly the same as Indiana Jones's costume.
That's hilarious.
It's the same costume.
That's
amazing. Which is not very different from Humphrey Bogart's costume in Treasure of Sierra Madre.
Yeah, totally.
Right? Yeah. Right? And so what's interesting is that when Raiders came out, for people my age,
even African Queen, he has a hat. Like, no, that totally makes sense.
So, you know, when that came out, it blew us away. Like, wow, it was something new, but it was not new at all. like it was not new at all. It was referencing all of this old stuff, but it felt new to us. And that's the other thing that can happen. If you know enough older things, you can reintroduce it, and it's brand new to people. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's like the opening. It's like in Goodfellas when you're, you know, you have like great train robbery, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like the scene where Joe Pesci's shooting right at the, you know what I mean? It's like, that's a great way to set up a character going back to the beginning. Yeah,
that's the beginning. That's like the first, practically the first movie, you know, that was a movie.
But he has it. But Scorsese's got it.
Scorsese has so many references. Yeah. You know, that he knows every shot from every movie probably ever made.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's
you know, and it's all in there. But so does Spielberg, and so does they all do. All those people at the top have that. They all have those references. They never say, I've never seen that Billy Wilder movie.
Yeah,
You know what
exactly.
I mean?
Yeah, can you imagine?
Yeah,
Yeah.
those guys would stop inviting you out for coffee. Like you said that if you were in their company, like
Yeah.
person's
Yeah, I
a
was
hack.
talking to James Cameron. I asked him if he ever saw Double Indemnity, and he's like, "No, I never even heard of it." It's like that would said none of those people ever.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Well, but it makes sense, right? If you know, I need to be ready, right? I need to be so prepared. Having those references. Can you imagine how many times having those references in Scorsese's head saved his butt?
oh yeah,
Can you even imagine? Like, think about the pressure. He's Martin Scorsese, but like, how many times was he stuck on something and he goes, "Oh wait, oh that's right, Fellini did this, or Truffaut did that, or you name it, right?
yep.
Hitchcock did this."
That reminds me of I think I've mentioned it on the show, but it's worth mentioning again, which is the retrograde zoom shot in Jaws. I used to have this argument with people I used to hang out with, and they would say that shot in Jaws was a Hitchcock shot, and I said it wasn't, and because what they were talking about was the technical thing, and which is yes, it's exactly technically what Hitchcock did. So the retrograde zoom is that thing you've seen where a character is standing or there or something, and the background sort of warps behind them, and that's the camera is sort of as dollying in, moving in, and the lens is sort of zooming out, and anyway, it creates this illusion of warped background. We're used to that now, but Hitchcock invented it or his camera, whoever, but they invented it on the movie Vertigo. As far as I know, that's where it came from, Vertigo. And there's a scene in that movie where Jimmy Stewart is walking up these stairs, and Jimmy Stewart is afraid of heights, and he's walking up these stairs of this big tower, and he looks down, and it's a point of view shot, so you're looking down the stairwell, and it stretches. And then you cut to Jimmy Stewart's reaction. That's a very Hitchcock kind of cut, right? Show somebody looking at something, show the thing, show their reaction. That's a very Hitchcock thing. In Jaws, and this is the first time I know of it being used this way. Maybe somebody used it before, but as far as I know, this is the first time. I had never seen it before I saw Jaws, which is in Jaws, the sheriff is on the beach, and somebody says shark, and he's concerned, and you cut to him, and then the retrograde zoom happens, and all the background warps behind him, and what I said that made those shots different was that Hitchcock's was an actual point of view. This is what the character is seeing. Spielberg's was an emotional point of view. This is what the character is feeling. That's a fundamentally different way to use the shot. However, Spielberg had that in his head to use because he knew Hitchcock so well.
Yep.
So,
that's right.
And now everybody uses it all the time. I think it gets overused.
Right. Sure.
Yeah.
But that's just it. And like I think that the more that, well, really the longer that I've gotten to learn from you and we've been friends, it's like, and the more people I've seen learn this stuff, right? This is the difference. If there was one thing, Brian, it's like, what's the difference? This is the difference between somebody getting good enough to impress their friends. It's like learning one coin trick, right? Good enough to impress their friends, or actually caring enough about what it is, right, to genuinely get good. Like want it down in their bones good. The difference is actually taking the effort, right, to get on a good diet of content, right? And I'm sure this is the same thing. I'm sure if you talk to physical trainers, they'd say, yeah, I mean, we have people that come in here and they work out like crazy, but every night they're eating ding-dongs and hoes. It's like, it's never gonna, you got to commit to it. If you really want to master it, you've got to commit to it. And this is the part. Like, how many times have we been in some sort of environment, right, where you're like, oh, you should see this, and they go, yeah, but it's not on Hulu. And you're like, okay, well, figure it out. I don't know, like,
Right.
find, go to the library or whatever. It's like, if you're not willing to put that much effort forward, that's it. You're done.
Well, the thing is to know that about yourself. To say, "Oh, I don't love it that much to do that." That's fine.
Great.
But don't call yourself a pro if you're not willing to do the work a pro will do. Yeah. And that's it. If you want to be a hobbyist,
Well, Carl said that, right? And again, there's just so many good quotes from the interviews you've been doing. But like when Carl said, like he's like, what I wanted this thing, right? I wanted to be able to show up on my worst day and still hit my deadlines and still do a great job.
Mm-hmm.
Like, right? And it was like, whoa. He was like, that's what it means.
Right.
And again, this guy wrote The Jerk and Jaws. And he was like, what is it? What was my goal? My goal is to be so good that on my worst day, I'm going to show up. You probably remember the exact quote he said, but like, in essence, that's what I took from it. It was like, show up and I'm going to do my job, regardless of how I feel about it that day.
Yeah. And that comes from lots of things. It's reps. It's how much you've written and how much you've done and all of that. But it's also references. It is what you know. It also makes you confident in a lot of ways about what's working because you can think of several examples of it working. Like a lot of the times I've noticed, well, people will say to me, I don't know if that's going to work. And I'm like, I have 8 examples in my head of it working. Mm-hmm. I'm not guessing. So they think it's like this crazy confidence that comes out of nowhere, but it's not. It's like, well, Spielberg did it and Hitchcock did it and this person did it. You know what I mean?
Whoever wrote that Columbo episode knew that was going to work.
Yes.
They knew that was going to work. Oh, well, I mean, Meeting on the Cane's amazing. And it's like, I know it'll work. Like, and when you were moving at that clip that those folks were moving at, right? I mean, think about that hour-and-a-half long special. I think they did 5 in 4.5 months. It was like, the producer said it was the worst summer of his life.
Yeah.
But if you're moving at that clip, writing, shooting, like all that, you cannot afford to go, I'm going to go down to the Broadcast Museum and spend a couple months down there before I write this.
Yeah.
Right? The time to do that is before Letterman had the contract. It was before Rock had the big opportunity on HBO. It was before David Blaine. Like, it's like, if you're lucky, when you have the downtime, this is the time to get all that in, right? Yeah. Because when you get that once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, it's like, in a week, I need you to turn this around. And you go, oh, crap, I should have gone down to the museum and done this or that.
Right.
Now's the time.
There's a point, and you're talking about it a little bit, but at first it will feel like homework. That's just what it feels like.
That's right.
But then it doesn't. Then it becomes a kind of a treasure hunt. It's a different thing. Mm-hmm. Then it becomes, it's not homework, and you can't quite, like, I have to do this thing. It's like people who have to jog. Right? Like, I got to jog. It's raining outside. It's snowing outside. I got to jog, though. It becomes more like that, where it's not a chore, and you have to get past the point where it's a chore. And once you get past that, once you break that wall, it's like a whole world opens up. I swear to you, it's like a whole world.
It's just like a diet or working out. It's the same exact thing. It's like you talk. I know friends that are runners, and they're just like, man, you got to just try. Once you get there, once you start running and you hit that point, you'll be a runner the rest of your life. And it's like, I don't love it enough to, clearly look at me, and that's okay. Right. But it's that, and it's like, but I don't think they're lying.
I don't think they're lying either. I don't think they're lying either. It's just you have to decide. Yeah. You have to decide, oh, do I love it that much? And if you don't, just make your peace with that. Right. And say, oh, I don't love it enough to get good at it. I have a friend who's an illustrator. He's a story artist at Pixar now, but when he was in art school, he maybe I've mentioned it before, but when he was in art school, he wanted to do comics, and he would always do these figures, and they were good. He could always draw. He was always very good. And I went into his dorm room one day, and he was doing these figures, and I said, "You want to do comics, right?" He said, "Yeah." And I go, "But you never draw environments." He's like, oh, man. I go, you got to draw people in environments, right? Like, there's going to be environments, and they help tell the story. And he's like, oh, yeah. And then I saw him a week later, and he had a sketchbook full of environments he had drawn. He just went out and just drew and drew and drew and drew and drew and drew. And I will tell you, I've known a lot of illustrators in my life, and I've known a lot of really great ones. And the great ones draw all the time. It's mileage. It's how much they draw all the time. They always have a sketchbook. They always, always. Yeah.
I remember I once had a mentor who said, he was like, is there any advice? Like, but I should keep in mind, they're like, always have a book. He's like, if you're waiting at the dentist's office, you got the book. You can look at it. If you're waiting, for your pizza, you got your book. He's like, you need to be going through a book a week. And I was like, what? That seemed crazy to me. And now it's like, whenever I'm in my car, if I'm by myself, I'm listening to a book. If I'm like, and then all of a sudden it's like, once you get in the rhythm of that, you're like, oh, okay, got it. Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah.
But you have to kind of make that choice.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with making the other choice, but understand what that means. Right.
And understand this. If you want to be an actor, writer, director, you name it, you're going up against a bunch of people that were willing to make the other decision.
Yeah, it's true.
You're going up against, like, if you want to be a comedian and you don't know who Red Skelton is, that's a problem.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a problem. Like, it's just basic, stuff, right?
Right.
I'm not want to be a comedian, but I'm just telling you, it's like, I know who Red Skelton is, but I'm just saying, like, this stuff will matter, because at some point, having that reference, you'll go, remember how Red Skelton built that whole thing where he'd wear the hat and he would do the drunk routine? What if I did something like this, except I turned it and I blah, 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 right?
Right.
Boom. You can get yourself out of trouble. It's literally survival information.
Yeah.
Right? It's all these people, like 100 some odd years of people just going, here you go. Here's how to do it. I figured out a way to make it work. And you're like, thank you, all day long.
Yeah.
And so that's leading us to this idea we want to do, which is just the 30-day story challenge, right? It's almost like we're going to put together a diet, right? And we're going to link to it if anybody wants to look at it. And it's just 30 days of movies or TV shows or episodes. And then there's one thing to look for, because what we also want to do is set you up to be able to watch it and go, we want you to be able to see the thing. Because a lot of times, Brian, like, you'd be like, Jesse, watch this. And I'd be like, I watched it. I don't know. And you're like, this scene. I was like, oh, once you would point out, I was like, oh, yeah, I didn't really catch. That totally makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, see how they visualized what was inside of his mind? Oh, that was brilliant. Yeah, no, that's cool. So we're going to give you a prompt, right? Watch how they communicated this thing. Look at how, it's like we talked about in Stagecoach, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have a problem. You have to explain that this person is a prostitute and she's getting kicked out of town, and you can't say any of that stuff, right? And you have to do it. How do you do it? It's like, well, here's how he solved it. Mm-hmm. It's like whatever those things are. So there's going to be a prompt with every movie or show, right, for people to watch. And just like any diet, we'd love to hear how after 30 days, how it changed the way people like maybe started rewiring what people are seeing, right? And what they can really also how their tastes are evolving. I think would be really interesting too.
Well, it does become cumulative, right? So people often think, oh, I'll watch this and I'll know that, or I'll watch it. It's like, no, you'll start to see a pattern of quality. Quality has it feels a certain way, and you'll start to be able to feel it. And in fact, if people were on this diet and then went back to something more recent, they would see, they'll see the deficiencies. So, like, I did one of these interviews we were talking about, and I'm a person who, believe me, I don't like being this person. I don't like the reputation of being this person who doesn't like anything, right? Which isn't true, right? But I don't tend to like a lot of stuff that gets made now. I think there's a sensibility issue. I just don't. And everybody says this is the golden age of television, and I don't believe that. I don't see that. I don't see evidence of that. And partially it's because I have really good examples in my head of how to do it well. And so I suppose in a vacuum, when you don't know stuff, right, because you haven't seen it, you go, that's really good. And I go, I know 10 examples of that very thing done better. I have them all in my head.
Yeah.
You could watch, oh, that's in black and white, isn't it? Well, you'll never know then. But I have 10 examples of that working better. And so like one of the things, I get one of the people I spoke to was getting on me about this. It's like, are you saying there's so many shows? Are you saying there's nothing you like, and no dramas? And I couldn't think of one at the moment, but later, like things happen sometimes. Later, I thought of Chernobyl.
Yeah,
right?
Chernobyl was great. Yeah,
right. But Chernobyl did
There's
all
some amazing work in Chernobyl.
it did all the things that I see missing from things. So
Yeah.
So it's like, and people who don't know what I'm talking about will say that old fashioned stuff won't work anymore. It's like, you don't know what I'm saying. They do these things. For instance, in order to get you to understand how dangerous a particular situation was on Chernobyl, they would always tell you ahead of time.
Yeah.
It was structured in a way. So the way I see things written now is you might see some people naked in a cave going through water and whatever. And the way most people do it is later they tell you that was highly radioactive. And, that's what they tell you. Chernobyl, they'll say that's the most radioactive thing in the world. Right.
Yeah.
And then you see people, and then you can have an emotional response. Because what I see often is you don't have an emotional response. What you have is you have a response that tells you this should be emotional. So you go, oh, that would be sad. Oh, that would be scary. Oh, that would, right? You have an intellectual idea of, and it's all up here, right? But once you say, like there's one thing in Chernobyl where they're talking about the roof of this building where this meltdown was, and they have to have these workers go up and get rid of some of this debris.
Yeah.
And there's a conversation about it. And this guy says, at the end of that conversation, he says, so what you're saying is that rooftop is the most dangerous place on earth right now. Yeah, that's right. Now, cut to people having to go.
Totally.
Right?
Yep.
That's what I mostly don't see. I don't see that. So what happens is I see people running on that roof, and then in most things what I see is afterwards they go, that's the most dangerous place on earth. I'm like, that would have been nice to know ahead of time. That would have been nice to know before.
Right. There's actually there's that other scene where they're coming in on the bus, and they're like, wear these masks, this is the most, radioactive spot in the world or whatever. And then he comes into the trailer, and before that scene, remember, he goes, these people are miners, they work in the dark and they see everything. Like, don't lie to them.
Don't lie to them.
Unbelievable writing. Yeah. God. But then when he comes in, they have this conversation, and he goes, do these masks work? And he's like, yes. And then at the end, he throws the mask to him, and he goes, if they worked, you would have been wearing one. And he walks out. And I was like, that's how you build a scene, man. Like, you know what I mean? They set it up, giving them the masks on their way. It was like exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But I remember when Chernobyl came out going like, I remember the first episode came out and there was no one really talking about it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, Chernobyl. I started watching. I was like, who is this? Like, what is going on right now? I'm so used to HBO stuff just being like held up by like naked people or ultra violence or just shock. And all of a sudden I was like, what is going on with this show? We started talking about it. It's like, there's something going on with this show. Mm-hmm. And the fact that it was so well done all the way through, I mean, because that's ultimately all we want, right?
Right.
It's, dude, I just saw the best show. You got to see this. This is awesome. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, it felt like that was a way bigger hit than maybe they'd anticipated it being.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't hear about it. All I heard about was Game of Thrones and stuff. But then all of a sudden you started seeing a couple weeks in, people started going like, hey, this show, Chernobyl. Because the good stuff will always rise to the top. Like,
it will.
Given enough time, the good stuff will always rise to the top.
Yeah, I think that's true. And that's all I'm talking about, right? So that's what I mean. So I can imagine the other version of Chernobyl that was the scenes in reverse, like we're talking about, right? And I can imagine a bunch of people saying, you should see it, it's really good. And me watching it going, it's not really good, because in my mind, I can see the other version.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I hear this a lot. We were talking to somebody, and they were like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, where the first act needs to have the armature, either dramatized or said. And they're like, but I preferred if really you don't hear the armature until the third act. And it was like, when did that start being a thing? Right? Where you like, you have to wait through an hour and a half or something, and they're like, and the point of this was this. And you're like, what if I didn't wait an hour and a half? What if you lost me?
Right?
And so things will meander, and then they'll have this really profound armature statement at the end of a movie. And you're like, God, if you would have just had something that told me that at the beginning,
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, we were talking about A Star Is Born, the original Star Is Born.
Nobody watches the original Star Is Born.
Get out of here.
It's so good.
Oh my God. I'd only seen the other ones, and you're like, you got to watch the first one. I was like, all right, cool. So I watched it, and I was like, I think I was texting you. I was like, get out of here. The first act of that movie, they stated the armature 3 or 4 different ways.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
The grandma says it, the agent says it, and grandma won't get off the subject. She keeps going, do you understand what I'm talking about? This is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? You know, the pursuit of your dreams is going to break your heart. The manager, you go to the manager's office, pursuit of your dreams is going to break your heart. But it's like over and over and over again. And you're like, I know exactly what this movie is going to be. And talk about a great movie, man. Like, it's so much better than the other ones. And I thought you couldn't do better. Like, you know, because I was like, oh, well, how you do better than, you know, the
Judy Garland,
one, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just because it's Judy Garland. But I was like, nope. This one's insane.
Isn't that? I try to tell people, but they were like, that was made in the 30s. I'm like, there's a reason they keep remaking it. And here's what's interesting. Yeah. This is a really good example of what I'm talking about, because that's a thing where I actually have a real world know it was done better, right? So when I saw the new A Star Is Born, I was like, that's not as good. Oh, I liked it. I thought it was good. Have you seen the original? Well, no. Well, then what are you talking about? You don't even know what you're saying.
Yeah.
And so
I love macaroni and cheese. You ever had a steak? No. But I'm telling you, it can't be as good as macaroni and cheese. And you're like, okay.
Right.
Cool. I don't know what to do with that.
Because what happens in the new version of A Star Is Born is that the first thing that happens essentially to that character is she's discovered. Right? Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
It's essentially like she gives one performance and is like hanging out with the big star, and right? That's not the way the original works, right? No. There's a struggle.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
They do some stuff in that movie, man.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And so
the first act of that movie, they hold on as long as they possibly can.
Yeah.
For a breakthrough. Yeah. On top of that, they did exactly. God, these guys are so good. Like, they did exactly. It worked exactly the way they wanted it to. Mm-hmm. First time I see her, I was like, she's not a star. This isn't going to work. You know what I mean? Without even noticing, by the end of the film, she's like, how is she not the biggest star in the world? Like, the way that they built that movie, masterful. I mean, it's like, it's unbelievable. My Fair Lady has some shit like that in it too, where it's like she becomes a flower over the course of the film, and you're like, get out! Whoever did that is at such a different level to be thinking like that.
Right, but that's something you can use, right? When you see that, there's a transition. Then you're having a conversation. You're making a piece, and you go, remember in A Star Is Born, or in My Fair Lady, where she becomes a flower? Is there a way we can transition the character that's like that? Like, that's what happens when you have more of a...
I didn't even connect the dots on those two until you said that.
Mm-hmm.
They both do the same thing. Even if you look at the outfits in the first act of From My Fair Lady and A Star Is Born, they even had similar, like, cuts. And like, it's... Talk about, okay, so you have the problem. I need to transform a character from nothing into, you know, the biggest version of a star or whatever. How do you do that? Watch A Star Is Born, watch My Fair Lady, like, and all of a sudden you're like, got it. That's how you do it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's Lowell Gans and Babalu Mandel, who are two amazing screenwriters. They wrote the movie Parenthood, and they wrote a lot of things: City Slickers, Parenthood, Splash, A League of Their Own. But they love the original Dick Van Dyke Show, and that's when they were kids. That was the show. You know, they were coming up watching that show, and made them want to be writers. The Dick Van Dyke Show. It made a lot of people want to be writers because it's about a comedy writer. So that's, you know, but. There's an episode of that show where there's a birthday party, and they can't get the performer who was going to perform at the birthday party, and so the dad has to be the performer.
Yeah,
that's also in Parenthood, right. If you see Parenthood, it's also in Parenthood, and these guys were big Dick Van Dyke Show fans. Right, so they had something they could. Now it's different because Dick Van Dyke's a very different kind of person than Steve Martin.
Right,
you know, so it's different, and they do different things. But you know,
and it's one of the most memorable sections of Parenthood. Right?
Yeah. But they had something that the more references you have, the better off you're going to be. It's just, you'll just be better. Because it allows you to get, in a way, more hours in than you could in your lifetime.
Yeah.
You know?
And the access we have, Brian. I mean, the access. We used to talk, I mean, because we both spent most of our lives growing up in Seattle, right? It's like we talk about, like, you'd have to go down to Scarecrow Video, or there was the Cinema Books, or there was these places that maybe you could find a copy of. Like, it's like, now it's like, it's all right there. Like, what do you want to watch?
I don't understand it. I can't wrap my head around it, because I remember when it was hard to see stuff. I remember you're like, oh, I read about this movie, but I can't see it. And it would just, there would be no way to see it. And now it really is, it's not streaming. Right. Like in the, like, I don't know how to see it. It makes me.
Well, the library has one, but that's like 6 blocks away. And you're like, yeah, totally.
You know, I used to do anything to get a hold of, and, I was a kid before you could watch movies at home, like, other than on what came on TV, right? So it was very difficult. Like, sometimes they would bring stuff back in a theater, like an old movie. There used to be a place that's all they did is show old movies. And so, and that was the only way to see them. And you got to see stuff in the theater. So I saw, like, my first real Charlie Chaplin feature films in a theater. And, I got to see all that stuff in a theater. So, which was really nice. I hope one day that kind of thing comes back, because it was pretty cool to see that stuff projected and to see it with an audience and see the reactions and everything. But I would go over, hell and high water to see that stuff. And now the smallest amount of effort is too much effort, and I don't understand it. I know I sound like an old curmudgeon, but that's a real thing. I don't understand it. I used to, as a kid, you could, actual film, you could get a film from the library, an actual film, but you could get a projector. So an actual old film projector, but you had to take a little class to learn how to run it and stuff. And I did that. Like, I found out you could do it. I'm like, what? So I figured out how to run the projector. I took their class, and I would get the projector and get movies, old silent movies,
so cool,
and project them and watch them and study them. I don't know how old I was, probably 13, maybe, when I started doing that, something like that, 12, 13. And I saw a lot of Buster Keaton, saw a lot of Charlie Chaplin, saw all that stuff. Man.
And seeing it on film like that is magic too.
It is.
Like, the individual frames, there's something about it. Like, I think I told you, I was like, my friend Emily, she was going to the UCLA, and I dropped her off there because I could never get no fancy school. She was in the master's program, and I was waiting for her to give her a ride after class. And I was walking around in the movie theater there, and I just like, there was people walking in, and I walked in, and they're watching On the Waterfront in like an old print that's still like the scratches and stuff. And I remember just like sitting down going, oh my God, these people, this is like what they do for school. Mm-hmm. They get to see the original, and there's like a spirit to it when it's like on film like that, that's just insane. But I would say this, with the new series that's going to start next episode, if you don't believe us, listen to the masters, because it's called Masters of the Craft for a reason. I mean, the people you're talking to are all insane people. I think we could talk about some of the folks that are on. Like,
you want to, yeah.
Right? Yeah, you might as well. Like the first one, or, well, let me say this before I list these people. Watch for their references. If you don't believe us, listen for their references. Listen to how the folks at the top, how they talk about, well, have you seen this? And I watch this, and this really influenced me, and like, listen to what they're saying. Ask yourself the question: are they talking about stuff that's happening right now, or are they talking about stuff that had happened in the past? Right? Just a thing to look for, right? A clue to listen for. But you've been with COVID going on, and with all of your friends and all these crazy people, you've been doing a ton of these interviews that people are going to start to see really over the course of like the next year, I think, because you've been just having the crazy ones. The first one is with Danny Rubin. Can you talk about who Danny Rubin is and why you picked him as your first kind of guest?
Danny Rubin is the screenwriter who wrote Groundhog Day. What he's most famous for is Groundhog Day. He also wrote the Broadway play version of Groundhog Day. and he actually, I've never seen it, but he really feels like he made some improvement on the movie when he did the play in some ways. But Danny is, first of all, he couldn't be a nicer human being, but he really couldn't. Just a cool dude who I met back when I did my the EG conference where I gave that lecture, and he was there. A very humble guy. He came up to me, liked my talk, and started talking to me. And I asked him, I'm polite, and asked him what he did. And he goes, "I'm a screenwriter." I'm like, "Oh yeah, what's your name?" He's like, "Danny Rubin." I'm like, "Dude, you wrote Groundhog Day." Like I knew who he was. And but we kept in touch and stuff. And when I asked him to do the show, he was very cool about it. He was happy to do it, and it was a really great conversation. So I can't wait for people to see it because it was a really great conversation. We'll hear it depending on how they get this show. But yeah, just a really cool dude who talks about, everybody's talking about the nuts and bolts of the job, and the way
Can you talk about why, and so this is going to be the transition that people are going to see, where like I'm interviewing you, and then there's going to be an episode where you're interviewing the master of the craft, and then I'm going to be interviewing you again, and then we're going to be going between this, and I'm hoping that there's also going to be opportunities for me to ask you questions of, when this person said this, help me understand that more, because when you're talking to these folks, right, you both will like mention something and be like, "Oh, that's really great," and I'm like, "I want to talk more about that." And so I see probably a lot of that kind of stuff happening in the in-between episodes. But who are some of the other people that folks can look forward to that you talk to, right? We mentioned Carl, right?
Yeah, Carl Gottlieb, Danny Rubin, Ronnie Del Carmen, who's amazing. And people who don't know Ronnie's a story artist, Pixar story artist, who is largely responsible for that opening sequence in Up, in the movie Up. I mean, he did a lot. He's done a lot of things, but that's
crazy. Yeah,
that's a lot of him in there. Just an amazing, and he was great to talk to too. Also, you know what? I'm going to keep saying they're the nicest guy in the world, but everybody I've talked to, they're just really sweet people too. So, and also people I would just want to talk to. So part of the deal is, instead of getting into all the people, part of the deal is, I mean, I will, but I was working with an animator, working with Glenn Keane on a project years ago. And it was strange for me because I was a fan, and he asked me to work on this movie with him. And then I found myself in this interesting position where I'm a professional. I got to help him with his story, but I also am a fan. And I felt like I was in a very privileged position to see somebody. So if you don't know who Glenn Keane is, he's the animator behind The Beast and Beauty and the Beast. Designed that character as well. The same for Little Mermaid and Aladdin and Pocahontas. Lots of Ratigan, if you've seen, Great Mouse Detective. Like that's Tarzan in the Disney Tarzan. Like that's Glenn. And Glenn is a very smart person about how he does what he does. And it was interesting to be in the room with him, creating and watching him create. And I felt like it would be nice. I know a lot of people would want to be a fly on the wall for this process, to see this process. And so the idea of this show, Masters of the Craft, was a way for people to be a fly on the wall and to hear how people at a certain level talk about craft and how they think about craft, how they think about what they do. And so that's really the point of it. So yeah, you get to hear, these people at the top, the guy who wrote Jaws, you get to hear what he thinks about what he does, right? And the jerk, right? And so, let's see, who else have we talked to?
You talked to Paul
Feig, my friend Paul, yeah, who, Paul Feig, directed Bridesmaids, created Freaks and Geeks, did the new Ghostbusters, did Simple Favor. Anyway, that's Paul, and Paul's a guy I've known for a long time, and also really nice guy. But it's all true. It's all. I'm not just saying it's not show business, crap. Like really good dude. But but he did it, so you get to hear, what he says, things he says. Who else?
Just did Willow, right?
Oh yeah, G. Willow Wilson, who is a graphic novelist or comic book writer and novelist, and she was great. She took my class years ago. I don't know, 11 years ago or something. Is where I met her. But just she was already working, but she's really gone on to great things and did Ms. Marvel. So really did the first female Muslim superhero character of any significance in mainstream comics. And that brought her a lot of notoriety. Just a smart, insightful human being. So I was really happy to have her on.
Gene, you did.
Oh yeah, Gene Luen Yang, who his most famous book, I think, is American Born Chinese, which is a graphic novel. But he's done a ton of stuff, and I can't remember his title. He had a title, like he went around trying to get kids to read, and it was an official position. Like it was like a government kind of like, you are the guy who tells kids to read. I don't remember what it's called, but that's what he did. But also just a bright guy who it's worth hearing him talk and hearing him think, hearing how he thinks about things.
What's the one you just did last week?
Oh, the one I did last week is Frank Oz, and Frank did well. If you don't know Frank Oz, you probably do. I know sometimes people don't know his name, which is interesting, but they know his work. So Frank Oz is he's a director. So he directed Little Shop of Horrors. He directed a movie called The Score. He directed Death at a Funeral. He directed Indian in the Cupboard.
30 Rotten Scoundrels.
30 Rotten Scoundrels. So he's a director. He's also a performer. And so he is the performer behind Miss Piggy, Fozzie Bear, Cookie Monster, Grover, Sam the Eagle, and Yoda.
Animal, right?
Animal and Yoda. Yeah.
Yoda's insane. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we don't really talk about any of that stuff. That's
what I wanted you to talk about him, because and so when people are listening, that was never the point, was to go, what was it like to, be Miss Piggy?
Yeah.
That's not what you're trying to do.
It's not it's not that kind of show where it's like, what was Miss Piggy really like? It's not that show. He doesn't come on and do voices, and it's none of the like that.
Yeah.
It's all about how he approaches his work and how he thinks about his work. He's a serious crafts person, and I thought nobody does an interview with him where they ask him serious craft questions. I want to know how you create that way. How can you be both Miss Piggy and Yoda? Where does that come from?
Yeah.
Right?
Icons. He just makes icons. It's what's the process?
Yeah. How are you Cookie Monster? How is that? So it's all about that, and he talks about his directing as well, and it's all about craft. It's all about how people think and how they approach their work and the philosophies behind it and influences and things like that. It's not like there's no laughs in it, but it's not about being funny, and it's not about gossip thing, and it's not about show business, and it's about the work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Perfect. And so for everybody listening or watching, starting next week is the first episode of that. And you're going to kind of see an episode of Master of the Craft, episode of You're a Storyteller. And it's kind of like this thing going back and forth, where you're really interviewing all these folks at the top of their game. And we're trying to show how it all kind of connects, and also invite some other voices into the conversation too. Right. Which I think is going to be really great. And so I've gotten to see some of the episodes already, and they're dynamite, and just, again, not only the nicest people, but the gold that they just throw out and give away is amazing. Some of the stuff I told you, I was watching Frank's, and I was like, God, I was texting you about it. I was like, when he said this, when he said that, I was like, that's brilliant. It makes total sense. And, and it's like, God, and they just have all this stuff in their head, and it's just like, how do we get as much of it out of their heads as possible and into all of your heads so that, collectively we can all just keep doing a better and better job. So thanks, Brian. I'm looking forward to the new show. And don't forget, like, you are what you eat, right? So 30-day challenge, we're going to post a link of, like, here's 30 different, either it's going to be a TV show episode or movies. Here's the thing to look for, and we just encourage you to at least try. At least give it a shot. Because once you get through that dip, I think you'll find that it will do nothing but help you moving forward.
This program is produced in Seattle, Washington by Belief Agency.